spaces. And why I'm starting with you specifically is when you're talking about disaster risk reduction. We've seen what's happening across African cities and urban spaces with flooding. How do we mitigate that? And Marceline, your specialty is around climate change adaptation and intersection with when it comes to geospatial information systems and remote sensing. So I want to briefly talk about some of the hurdles you think we have when it comes to using Earth observation data in a way that's very agile and responsive to some of the biggest challenges we have in urban centers, disaster risk management and mitigation. Marceline.
Okay, thank you very much. Once again, my name is Marceline Ojwala, and I work at the Directorate of Resource Surveys and Remote Sensing. And I'm happy to be in the panel with the Honorable Otichilo. He was once a director at my institution. Back to the question, allow me to start off by saying that Kenya as a country is one of the African countries that first had experience when it comes to space technology. Yesterday we were informed that San Marcos in Malindi was launched in the year 1964. This therefore placed Kenya in a strategic position when it comes to space technology. However, as she has just mentioned, there are still some obstacles that are being faced. So the first one that I'm going to mention is the linkage between science and policy. How are the policymakers taking communications from the scientists? When the scientists get their data and give it for decision making and say that this is how it is, and this is what should be done, and this is what should not be done, how does the policymakers take this? And then again, for the scientists also, how do we communicate this data to the policy makers? How do we package it? Because the policy makers need to solve a problem that is there, and they need accurate and precise information or data per se to address this. How do we communicate our data as scientists to the policy makers? The other point that I want to bring across is when it comes to building synergies as stakeholders in this field. As stakeholders who are generating data through Earth observation, how are we building synergies? We've seen from our two speakers mentioning about having an observatory that will require these data sets, bringing these data sets together to address the issues that you're talking of per se. Looking at our theme, which is translating to space data can actually be a good way of solving the societal challenges. How are we looking at this when it comes to synergy building? I can mention that we have a lot of data as stakeholders or as players in this field. In our institutions, wherever we are coming from, we have a lot of data, but this data is in raw form, and therefore there's need for bringing more, giving more meaning to these data sets, add value addition per se. How are we availing these data sets as players in the field for value addition so that these data can be meaningful, so that they are not in raw form as they are in currently. And then the other challenge that I would also like to mention, maybe final so that I don't talk too much and take more time, is the data sharing protocols or frameworks in place. How are they? How are they solving the issues or the challenges that we have per se? And allow me to stop at that. I will add more. Thank you.
Thank you, Marceline. Thank you. So the link between policy and science, very important. How do we communicate? And I want His Excellency, Bwana Governor, Dr. Wilbert, to talk about, we are right in your neighborhood. This is your success story. And Vihiga feels like you have tapped into what's possible and in bringing Earth observation and geospatial information into the masses. I mean, your county has over 600,000 people, and you've managed to trickle that down for us to see what's possible. And so I want to talk about the strategies that you think have worked for your county, and you sit within the Council of Governors as well. So maybe you can also talk about how do we communicate and have Earth observation not just penetrate government, but be very impactful as well, and be sort of a very seamless solution that comes by default to government and decision makers. Bwana Governor?
Thank you. First, I want to take this opportunity on my own behalf and on behalf of people of Vihiga to most sincerely thank the Kenya Space Agency for having this expo and exhibition. This is the second time, and I'm happy I'm attending again. This is a very good forum for us as Kenyans and other partners from other countries to be able to exchange ideas and views on how to use Earth observation and geospatial technologies in our development agenda. Now, back to the question you raised. I want to start by saying that Kenya is one of the few countries that has the legal and policy frameworks that are required to promote the use of geospatial technologies in development agenda. So when it comes to legal framework, we have no problem. And I'm sure the Kenya Space Agency, apart from the presidential order, they're already working on the act, which is going to come out very soon. Now, the use of Earth observation at the local level or at the county level has been a challenge, has been a big challenge, despite of the fact that the 47 counties that were established under the County Government Act are mandated or are obligated by the law to establish integrated development plans based on geo-information data. But because of lack of capacity at that level, it's taken a long time to be able to operationalize that. But I'm happy to report that in the last 6 years, we have made very drastic development in the use of geospatial data in our planning process. And this, I would say, Vihiga has taken a lead because by the virtue that the governor of Vihiga is a geospatial specialist, I have been able to, through my being a governor, be able to influence the rest of the other governors to take the lead, to take the use of geospatial data in planning process. And we did that through, by ourselves, establishing one. So for us, we have a very elaborate, well-elaborated geospatial data center that houses all the data sets we have. And we have taken GIS as our platform on which we undertake all this data analysis, and we use high-resolution satellite data for updating our maps and for ensuring that any developments that take place, we know where they are through monitoring. And as a result of that, I want to note that through our efforts, FAO, Food and Agricultural Organization, through European Union, have been able to come up with a program that is now targeting all the 47 counties. And the program aims to come up with spatial plans for all the 47 counties. And to be able to come up with spatial plans, we have had now to focus on how to use Earth observation and GIS as the major inputs in that process. And that program is ongoing, and I'm sure our colleagues from FAO who are here may be able to elaborate further. But the program is ongoing, and so far, everything is going on well. So I want to report that, yes, we have now embarked on the journey of now using geospatial data and technologies in data acquisition for our integrated development planning.
Thank you so much. Round of applause, guys. And I think as a parting shot towards the end, I'd be curious to get your thoughts on what next for Vihiga with what you've just talked about. But I think I'll go to Mr. Mairura. Mr. Mairura has a PhD in transportation planning. He's currently undertaking that, and he sits within the town and county planners association. And why that's important is urban planning has a component of transportation within it. And you're talking about sustainable urban development. Transportation sits within the core of that. And why I'm bringing that up is another challenge we have across African cities and developing nations. Transportation, and not just transportation, but a just transport system. You know, how is it accessible to the urban invisibles? Is it accessible to children? Is it accessible to the elderly? Is it accessible to persons with disability? And so I'd want him to talk about strategies that we can use to integrate Earth observation within transportation planning across developing nations. Where does Earth observation sit within this conversation when it comes to transportation planning within developing countries? Mr. Mairura.
Thank you very much. First and foremost, let me also indicate and affirm that indeed, as the Town and County Planners Association of Kenya, we indeed are excited to be part of this great discussion. And as a professional, as an engineer, and also as a town planner, I find this conference to be extremely timely and useful to us. Indeed, I would say right from the word go that before I come to the issue about transport, but just giving a general overview of the issues, it's actually true to say that you can't talk about effective and sustainable governance of whatever nature you want to talk about. Governance of our towns, governance of the county, governance of the nation, indeed governance of the entire world. We can't talk about effective management, governance of any institution which does not have tangible, quantifiable, and verifiable data. So data and information is extremely important. Indeed, they say information is power. Now, coming then to the urban scene, we actually find that in terms of the planning and development of our towns, and the same will apply to whatever area of jurisdiction you want to talk about, that there is that element of inadequate and in certain instances, total absence of data that is really useful for management, for planning. And therefore, in many instances, we want to prepare plans of our various towns, even for the city of Nairobi, our main city, but you actually find there isn't adequate information, okay? And therefore, you can't effectively plan. And because planning is about making use of the past, making use of the present, so that you are able to project into the future, then if you find then that you have no data, no information about the past and the present, then you can see making projections and therefore planning into the future becomes extremely difficult and therefore erratic. And therefore the importance of this conference to make sure that data is available for our urban areas becomes extremely important. And for the observatory itself, the Earth Observatory, I think my understanding is that it is much more cost-effective to be able to get information quickly than doing it the other way that we have always done it. And therefore, the technology of the Earth Observatory becomes important. Now, on matters then, transport, I think the same will apply. The same will apply. Indeed, you want to as the city manager of Nairobi, you want to just get to appreciate how much network you have of roads and streets and where they are located, without excluding the informal settlements. Then you actually find that that data is not readily available. It's not readily available. And therefore, even in terms of budgeting for the same, it becomes really just throwing your resources and assume that things will be done. It's also possible that you are trying to do maintenance works in the city roads, which roads and how many kilometers were done. You want to have that data at your fingertips so that maybe 3 years down the line you want to appreciate how far we have done. You'll find that kind of exercise becomes extremely difficult. So in terms of transportation, then the movement, because transportation over and above the infrastructure, the physical infrastructure, transportation is about movement of persons, services, and goods from one point to the other. Now, that also is another area where we actually find that it's, at the moment, it's not easily possible to get that information so that you get to know how the city is moving at various times of the day in that regard. And if there is a process of doing that, then you actually find it's very expensive. But you find the use of the Earth observatory methods, I think it can be, it's possible that can be made more effective, where then you are able to break down that data in respect to people engaged in various activities, in terms of people, various income groups, people living in various areas, the informal settlements, people industrial area, and so on. So that this observatory, Earth observatory system can be extremely useful in making that information readily available. And as I close, because I want just to connect that immediately, on our roads, a lot of the time what we see is the motor carriageway, the road as we know it, the surface on which the motor traffic is running, and walkways. Now, there is a lot of other elements that are within the road reserve. We have got infrastructure and other utility services, running cables, water pipes, sewer lines, power lines, and so on. At the moment, it is actually a nightmare. This morning, if you came along Jogo Road, the Nairobi Water and Sewerage Company is doing excavation to expand the water supply line towards the Eastlands. And as they are doing that, they actually do not know where the sewer line is. So as they do their excavation, you soon find that they have broken the sewer network. Everything has to stop. First of all, to check where we're going to close the sewer line because it's becoming messy before we can continue the works. They sort that one out, and the following day, the following week, as they do their works, they don't know where the power lines are because some of them are overhead, others are buried. They don't know where that is. Even the power company doesn't know where they are. So as they proceed with their works, the power line is cut. So there is no power in this institution. So we have to stop to put on the generator. Then Safaricom will also be doing their bit, okay? And either by design or whatever, they will tell you, yes, our cables were cut by our competition, okay? So our services are down. Nobody has any information about many of those services that are underground. If this technology can be used to assist governors, city managers, to sort out this problem, I think we'll be doing justice to ourselves and therefore working towards more sustainable cities now and in the future. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Mayura, for painting that very clearly. And you mentioned a couple of very interesting concepts. You mentioned about the gaps that exist when it comes to accessibility and availability of data. And that's very important. So guys in the room, if you're in that space, then that's an opportunity that we need to think of and figure out how to get that data, both historical and current. That's really a gap that exists. And which brings me to the segue of the role of private partnerships. Is there a role that they play when it comes to the private sector in this conversation? I think the elephant in the room is affordability and accessibility of high accurate and very high resolution Earth observation data. And that's what this conference is about, Earth observation for societal benefits. And so I want Beatrice to come in and talk about, do you think there's a role that private sector plays in this conversation? And I also want you to link that up to some of the programs you're supporting within the Kenya Urban Support Program. We've seen the Kenya Informal Settlement Program, a lot of pillars around housing and infrastructure. And so I'd want your take on the role that the private sector plays. Do you think this is part of the conversation that they come in and bridge that gap? Where do they sit within this conversation and opportunities we need to explore to have access to this data?
Thank you for the question, and I also hope we can maybe hear from Primoz a bit on that, since he's coming from the private sector. I think, as I mentioned, under the second Kenya Urban Support Program, when we were preparing, we saw this gap about the need to engage more with the private sector in urban planning. And that's why we decided to have a specific focus on this. I think it plays kind of both ways. One, how we can understand the private sector to plan better our cities, but then on the other side, how can we understand what the private sector can also bring in terms of data for planning. So in this context, we are developing, together with the State Department, the COG, an engagement framework where this can be addressed, and we hope to identify those opportunities to work more with the private sector. I think, and probably throughout this, through the conference, we have seen many examples of how the private sector is working on this space. And I think we need to develop more partnership between the government and the private sector to leverage their expertise on the generation of data. And we have some examples that we've been working under the Kenya Informal Settlements Improvement Project to collect data, engaging also with the private sector to develop the tools and engage the local citizens to collect this data. But I think it's a space that I would personally, my personal hope is that through programs such as KUSP, we can explore more such partnerships to leverage what the private sector is doing. But let me just emphasize that in the end, we can generate this data, we can have access to this data, but as some of the panelists have said, if we don't have the capacity at the local level to interpret this data and the support to leverage this data for planning, then it's useless. So we really need to work on generating that capacity, both in our in the government officials, but also in the experts, in the planners, the architects, the engineers, through the professional associations. So it's very important to have, and I'm hopeful as if this urban observatory is something that will pick up and will really move forward, that we can have a very strong engagement with all the different stakeholders, private sector, professional associations, government, development partners, to leverage everyone's expertise. Thank you.
Thank you. I think next I want Primoz to go next. And we're talking about the role of the private sector. And you sit right at the center of it when it comes to participatory and community action, when it comes to collective action within communities. And we've seen that through a couple of programs. And I want you to briefly talk about some of the programs and what you think made these programs successful, the learning points from these programs when it comes to involving communities in some of these programs. Maybe briefly touch on them, and then also talk about, briefly, just to add on to what she said on the role of the private sector. Where does that sit with Spatial Collective?
Here we go. Here's my beautiful voice. Thank you for having us here. My name is Primoz Kovacic. I'm originally from Slovenia, but I've lived in Kenya for the past 15 years. I run a company called Spatial Collective, which is a Kenyan company, together with Michelle over there. An elevator pitch would be that we support people and organizations in adopting available technologies to collect data that is important for them. So when we talk about the role of a private sector, right, we hold the knowledge, right? Let's just be honest here, right? We develop the tools, we know the methods, we know how to analyze stuff, but oftentimes we also lack capacity to address all of the challenges that are out there. Like, for example, informal settlements, according to the statistics, are growing again. According to UN, there is 60 to 90% of African rural land is not documented. The cities are growing at a rapid pace. Sometimes the governments are struggling to keep up. And this is where our role comes in, right? And especially with developing partnerships with communities that we are trying to serve. And why I think that is important, right? It's because, let's take an example of an informal settlement. I'm not from there. I don't know anything about it. All I hear is bad news most of the time, which is exaggerated most of the time. But the people who live there, they know the place really well. They know how to move around. They know what their everyday reality is. They experience it every day. So giving them the tools where they can use them to express themselves especially through geospatial innovation and geospatial tools, yields beautiful results, right? It provides you with data sets that, as a parachuting company inside the settlement, you will never be able to obtain. So in the past, we've trained thousands of people around East Africa, from Mogadishu to Dar es Salaam to Mwanza to Nairobi, all over Kenya. And the reason we do that is exactly that. Only through collaboration with communities, we're going to be able to address some of the biggest challenges that are out there. Only through collaboration with communities we'll be able to get the data that we need to address these challenges, get the truthful information. And our role as a private sector is really to then do the quality assurance, right? Because, yes, many of these communities are not professionals, but they do possess the capacity to collect data, but it's our responsibility to look at the quality of this data then and to make sure that things are in order, right? That we are not making decisions based on poor data sets. Now, what else am I supposed to talk about?
What is the strategy that you think worked that made communities really uptake as active participators in technology and uptake of it?
Yeah, and there's another thing. Like people also don't like being told what to do, right? Like when we observe from afar and make decisions on behalf of someone else, we're oftentimes left with like we hit a wall, because people, they might not trust you, they might not believe what you're saying, even if you come with facts. Teaching and training people to collect data themselves, bringing the data back, teaching them how to analyze that data, how to make informed decisions, that also like smooths kind of like that, the interaction between various actors, right? Like the private sector, the government, and the communities. So there is absolutely no one loses in this relationship, right? And the private sector and the technology plays a very important part in developing sustainable and healthy and communities, right?
Thank you. I think I'll have Daniel go next. Daniel, you're the techie in the panel, you and Marceline, and I think it would be interesting to get your thoughts on, you work within the UN Habitat, and part of that comes with creating an urban observatory, as we've seen from your presentation, and a lot of that depends on data, right? And not just data, but technology as well. When it comes to cloud computing, you've talked about Google Earth Engine, and I think as a techie sitting within the panel, I'd want to get your thoughts on what do you want to see more for us to empower techies, for them to churn out solutions, for them to integrate Earth observation, for them to not just churn out solutions, but solutions that actually work and they're able to translate to policy across all these segments when it comes to urban planning, community intersection, county governments, climate change, policy and adaptation? What do you think, what do you need as a techie, basically? What do you want to see more?
Yeah, thank you so much for the question. Yeah, so what we need more is to have convergence of all these ideas. So the urban observatory is where everything is converging. So you have a space for the private sector. So you don't have a system that is run by the government only, but the private sector has also a space. So we have the academia also being able to plug into the observatory. And again, once you set up this observatory, then you create a chance to have even independent researchers putting into their work within the system that can be used. So the solution here has been mentioned by one of the speakers, is just packaging data in a way that it can be understood for decision making. Yeah, so most of the time it is believed the technical team work on very complex models that when you take this to the government, they just see this as just your academia work. So if you can start breaking this down, that this is not just models you're making on how your urban areas can flood in case of a flooding, this can happen in a reality. So then we can start communicating to the authorities. And of course, the component on awareness, having high-level personnel understanding that Earth observation has value. So I'm excited to see His Excellency the Governor leading from the top, because most of the time the technical team works down here. So at the top level, the leaders know we know our problems, so we don't need what you're doing there. So really, if you can have these things connected, I think this is how we can start realizing a change. And of course, the tools are there. Initially, everyone was struggling with the tools, accessing the software. Today, an open source software can do almost everything a commercial software can do. So all this has been solved by time and technology. So thank you.
Thank you so much. So the key word there is convergence for techies in the room. And so I'm going to wrap it up. We're out of time. I would have loved to have this conversation extend a bit more, but I think we're out of time. So once again, Beatrice from the World Bank, Daniel, UN Habitat, His Excellency Governor Dr. Wilbur Otichilo, Marcelino Joala, Mr. Mairura, and Primoz. Please, a round of applause for this excellent panel. Do we need to take pictures?
You have to take a photo.
I was waiting for that.
Have to take a photo. You look too smart not to. And as Yariwa thanked all of them, can we also thank her for a fantastically moderated session as well, as she smiles for the photo. Let's give them a round of applause. It'll help them. His Excellency wants to continue the discussion while we're on stage as we walk out. Let's give him a round of applause as we leave, and all of them as well for the fantastic presentation. All right, so ladies and gentlemen, we are into our final session.